The morning Renata Cole fired a janitor for being too slow, she was already 12 minutes late to her own board meeting and didn't care about either fact. That was the thing about Renata. She moved through the world the way a sharp wind moves through an open field, fast, indifferent, leaving everything slightly disturbed in her wake. At 41, she had built Crestline Medical Supply from a two-room operation in suburban Cincinnati into a regional powerhouse with contracts across 6 states. She'd done it by being smarter than most people in the room and by never, not once, letting sentiment slow her down. The janitor's name was probably posted somewhere on a form she'd never read. He had been mopping the same patch of hallway for 20 minutes, and her heels kept squeaking on the wet tile. She'd told him twice to move. On the third time, she'd called building management and had him reassigned to the night shift. Permanent. She didn't think about it again before she reached the conference room door. The board meeting was about expansion. It was always about expansion with Renata. She took her seat at the head of the table, accepted a coffee from someone whose name she also didn't know, and pulled up the quarterly projections without glancing around to see who was already there and who wasn't. "We're moving into Tennessee and Virginia by Q3, she said, before anyone had technically called the meeting to order. "The distribution model stays the same. I want proposals on my desk by Thursday." No one argued. They rarely did anymore. The man she would eventually fire, though she didn't know him yet, was named Miles Dutton. He worked in Crestline's logistics division, specifically in the warehouse attached to the company's main distribution hub on the east side of the city. He was 38 years old, though he looked older some mornings, the way men who've carried a lot tend to. He had close-cropped dark hair going silver at the temples and the kind of hands that told you he'd done real work before the warehouse. Construction, maybe, or something else outdoors. He wore the same 3 flannels on rotation and kept a photo of his daughter tucked under the edge of his keyboard monitor, held in place by a strip of tape that had yellowed at the corners. Her name was Addie. She was 9. Miles had been raising Addie alone for 4 years, since her mother left for Portland with someone she'd met at a conference and didn't look back. He didn't talk about it much at work. Period. He came in, did his job, inventory reconciliation, shipping manifests, the kind of detail-oriented work that kept an entire supply chain from falling apart, and left in time to pick Addie up from the after-school program at St. Catherine's on the north side. He had a near-perfect attendance record over 6 years at Crestline. His supervisor, a cheerful man named Bart who wore Hawaiian shirts even in January, had nominated him for Employee of the Quarter twice. He'd won once. None of that was in the room the morning everything changed. It had rained the night before, a hard, late October rain that left the streets slick and dark. Miles had been up late with Addie, who had a geography project due, and had, in classic 9-year-old fashion, remembered this at 9:15 in the evening. They'd stayed up past 11 cutting out shapes of states and labeling capitals in her neatest handwriting. When she finally fell asleep at the kitchen table, her cheek pressed against a paper cutout of Oklahoma, Miles had carried her to bed and stood in her doorway for a moment, watching her breathe. He set 3 alarms. He still overslept. Not by much, 22 minutes, but enough to throw everything off. He skipped his shower, drank his coffee standing over the sink, and was halfway out the door when his phone buzzed with a text from the school. "Early dismissal today due to water main repair. Please arrange pickup by noon." He was already going to be late. Now he had to figure out how to leave work by noon, which meant calling Bart, which meant explaining, which meant he shook the spiral off and got in his car. He was 20 minutes outside the city when he saw it. A school bus had pulled to the shoulder of the highway, hazard lights blinking orange in the gray morning. Not unusual in itself. But the door was open and there was a small figure standing at the edge of the breakdown lane, a girl, maybe 7 or 8, in a yellow raincoat, clearly upset, clearly alone, and clearly about 3 feet from the guardrail with traffic moving at 65 miles an hour beside her. Miles didn't make a decision. He just pulled over. He had his hazards on and was out of the car before he'd fully processed what he was doing. The girl was crying, the kind of silent, whole-body crying that kids do when they're too scared to make noise. Her name, she eventually told him, was Sophie. She'd been sick, and she'd told the driver she felt like she was going to throw up, and the driver had let her off at what he thought was her stop, but it wasn't her stop, and now she didn't know where she was. Miles called 911 first. Then he sat with Sophie in the breakdown lane, his car angled to block the wind, talking to her about whatever came to mind. Did she have a dog? What was her teacher's name? Had she ever been to a Reds game? Until the patrol car arrived 11 minutes later. The officer took down his information. He gave it without thinking about the time. He was 47 minutes late to work. He'd barely reached his desk when Bart appeared in the doorway, not wearing his usual expression. Renata wants you upstairs, Bart said. He wasn't meeting Miles's eyes. Like, now. Miles didn't know what Renata looked like. He'd been at the company 6 years and had seen her exactly twice. Once from a distance at an all-hands meeting 2 years ago, and once in the parking garage when she'd walked past him without registering that he existed. He rode the elevator to the 4th floor with a quiet sense of dread that he didn't entirely understand yet. The conference room was large and unnecessarily cold. There were 4 people he didn't recognize seated along one side of the table. Renata Cole stood at the far end, arms crossed, wearing a charcoal blazer, and an expression that suggested she'd already decided everything that was about to happen. "Mr. Dutton," she said. "Yes." He stayed near the door. "You were scheduled to begin your shift at 7. It is currently 7:49. She didn't look at a clock when she said this. She'd already known. "I can explain. I've already pulled your file." She picked up a single sheet of paper from the table and set it down again without reading from it. 3 late arrivals in the past 18 months. "I understand you have a child." He didn't know why that last sentence felt like an accusation, but it did. "I do. And this morning there was a situation. There's always a situation, Mr. Dutton. Everyone in this building has a situation. What they also have is a start time." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice had that particular quality, measured and flat, that people use when they want to sound calm but are actually just done. "You've been a logistics coordinator here for 6 years. You know that our Tennessee contracts require manifest accuracy within a 40-minute window. You know what happens to that window when your chain of custody is disrupted at the start of shift." "I do know," he said, "and I'm sorry. But a child was. I'm going to stop you there." She set her hands flat on the table. "Do you know what my job is, Mr. Dutton? My job is to make decisions that most people in this building don't want to make. That's what being in this chair means. It means I don't get to let sentiment drive operations." He looked at her for a moment. He was tired. He hadn't slept enough. He'd left a child crying on the side of a highway. He hadn't had time to explain anything to Bart, and now he was standing in a cold conference room being told that sentiment was the problem. "Are you letting me go?" he asked. She held his gaze. "Effective today," he nodded once. There was a long pause in which no one else in the room said anything. "Okay," he said. He didn't argue. He didn't explain himself again. He turned, walked to the elevator, rode it back down to the 2nd floor, packed the photo of Addie and the small red stapler he'd bought himself years ago, and left the building. He sat in his car in the parking lot for a while, not yet ready to call his sister, not sure where to go next. He thought about Sophie in her yellow raincoat. He hoped she'd gotten home okay. Renata was back at her desk by 8:15. She had a 9 o'clock with the Tennessee procurement team, and a 10:30 she was dreading because it involved the company's legal counsel and a contract dispute that had been dragging on for months. She answered 7 emails before the 9 o'clock and sent 2 back unanswered because they didn't deserve her attention yet. At 9:10, her phone buzzed. She ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Then it rang, a full call, not a message, from a number she didn't recognize. She let it go to voicemail. 2 seconds later, it rang again from the same number. She picked up. "Miss Cole?" The voice on the other end was a woman's, calm and professional. "This is Officer Dana Pruitt with the Cincinnati Police Department. I have your daughter with me. She's safe." Renata went very still. "I'm sorry, what?" "Your daughter, Sophie. Sophie is at school." Her voice was automatic mechanical. "She left this morning at 7:15 with the bus." "Yes, ma'am." "There was an early dismissal today due to, I didn't get a notification." The notification went to a secondary contact on file, a Miss Karen Finch. "We weren't able to reach her, so we found your number through the school's emergency records. Sophie is fine. She was picked up on I-74 by a Good Samaritan this morning after being let off at the wrong stop. He stayed with her until we arrived." Renata's chair was already pushed back. She was reaching for her bag. "Where is she?" "Station 7, Westwood. Your daughter has been asking about the man who helped her. She keeps calling him, and I'm quoting her directly here, the flannel hero." Sophie was sitting on a bench outside the officer's break room eating animal crackers when Renata arrived. She was still in her yellow raincoat, which was damp at the hem. She looked up when her mother came through the door, and something in Renata's chest cracked open in a way she didn't have words for. Not relief, not quite, or not only. It was the specific terror of understanding, in one physical moment, exactly how wrong something could have gone. She crossed the room and held Sophie until Sophie said, "Mom, you're squishing me." "Good," Renata said, and didn't let go for another few seconds. Officer Pruitt walked her through what had happened. The bus driver had let Sophie off 2 stops early after she complained of nausea. A mistake, a lapse, the kind of thing that shouldn't happen and does anyway. Sophie had been standing at the edge of the breakdown lane for approximately 4 minutes before the driver of a passing car stopped. He sat with her the whole time, the officer said. 47 minutes between when he first stopped and when he gave me his information and left. He was going to be late to work, he mentioned. He kept apologizing for it. Renata looked at her. Do you have his name? Miles Dutton. I have his contact info if you'd like it. The name landed somewhere in her mind and didn't immediately connect to anything. She took the information, thanked the officer, bundled Sophie into the car, and drove in a silence she wasn't sure she knew how to fill. He was really nice, Sophie said, about 4 minutes into the drive. I know. He talked to me the whole time so I wouldn't be scared. He asked me what my favorite dinosaur was. She paused. I said Triceratops. Then he told me his daughter's favorite was Brachiosaurus because it had a long neck like a giraffe. Renata kept her eyes on the road. He has a little girl, Sophie continued. He said he had to go pick her up today too because there was a water main or something. He said he was probably already late and his boss was going to have something to say about it. She thought about this. He seemed kind of worried. About work, I mean. Not about me. He didn't seem worried about me. He made me feel like everything was normal. Renata said nothing. Mom? Yeah, do you think he got in trouble for being late? She didn't put it together until she was back at the office, standing at her desk, staring at the paper she'd set down without reading before she fired him. His name had been right there, Miles Dutton. She'd known it and not known it in the way you know names on a form. Abstractly, as a string of words, not as a person. He had left a child standing on the side of a highway at 7 in the morning and a girl in a yellow raincoat in exchange for a disciplinary record he hadn't earned. He had been 47 minutes late to work because he'd spent 47 minutes making sure her daughter wasn't alone. She sat down slowly. She was not, as a general rule, a woman who second-guessed herself. She'd built a company on the premise that good decisions required speed and consistency, and that hesitation was expensive. She believed that. She still believed it, in some abstract structural way that felt very far away from her at this particular moment. She pulled up his file again, 6 years, near-perfect attendance, 2 Employee of Quarter nominations, a daughter named Addie, an address on the north side of the city, not far from St. Catherine's Elementary, which she knew because Sophie had gone to a birthday party there in the 2nd grade. She sat with this for a while, then she picked up the phone and called Bart. The man I let go this morning, she said. Miles Dutton. What's his current status? Bart was quiet for a moment that told her everything about what he thought of the situation. He's gone, Miss Cole. We processed his clearance about an hour ago. I see. Another pause. Bart, is he the kind of employee you'd want back? This time the silence was different, shorter, more surprised. Ma'am, Bart said, with the careful deliberateness of someone choosing their words around a fact they've been sitting on all day, Miles Dutton is the best person we have in logistics. I don't say that lightly. She drove to his address that evening. She almost didn't. She sat in the parking garage for 8 minutes, running through every reason it was unnecessary and strange and professionally inadvisable. She had HR for this. She had protocols. She could send an email. She could have someone call him. But Sophie's voice was still running in her head. He made me feel like everything was normal, and Renata was finding it very hard to route that around. She rang the doorbell at 20 past 6. The door opened and Miles Dutton stood there in a flannel shirt, green, not the one he'd been wearing that morning, holding a dish towel and looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately read. Behind him, somewhere in the kitchen, something smelled like garlic and butter. Mrs. Cole, he said. She hadn't called ahead. She understood now that she should have. She'd spent the drive rehearsing something that now felt completely inadequate, and she was standing on his porch while his apartment smelled like dinner, and she had no good way to start. The little girl on the highway, she said, with the yellow raincoat. Something shifted in his face. Is she okay? She's my daughter. He went very still. Then, slowly, the dish towel lowered. Sophie, he said. She's fine. Renata's voice came out steadier than she expected. She's at home. She hasn't stopped talking about the flannel hero. She paused. She asked me 3 times today if you got in trouble at work. He let out a short breath that might have been a laugh and might have been something else entirely. Mr. Dutton, she said, and this was the part she'd rehearsed, and it still felt inadequate, but she said it anyway. I owe you an apology, and your job back, if you'll take it. And whatever else I can do that's worth anything. I'm not sure yet what that looks like, but I mean to figure it out. He looked at her for a long moment. He didn't say it's okay, which she appreciated, because it hadn't been. He didn't fill the silence with reassurances. He just stood there, steady and unreadable, the way he'd apparently been standing on the side of a highway while her daughter ate animal crackers and talked about dinosaurs. I'll take the job, he said finally. Good, she exhaled, thank you. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "Do you want to come in?" he said. "There's pasta. Addie makes too much pasta," and then acts surprised. She almost said no. She had 100 reasons to say no. "Okay," she said instead. She met Addie, who was 10 years old in the way that certain children are, fully formed in their opinions, suspicious of adults until proven otherwise, and capable of absorbing new information without making a big deal of it. She showed Renata a Brachiosaurus fact book she'd gotten from the library and explained at length why the long neck was aerodynamically efficient for grazing on tall trees. She ate her pasta without being asked twice. Miles passed the bread without saying much. He didn't make things easy or comfortable exactly, but he didn't make them awkward either. He was just present, the way Sophie had described. Like he understood that sometimes the thing people need is someone who doesn't make them feel like they have to perform. Renata wasn't used to that. When she left, 40 minutes later, thanking him twice in ways she hoped didn't sound as stiff as they felt, she sat in her car and thought about what she'd built. Not the revenue figures or the Tennessee contracts or the logistics chain that needed precise timing to function. She thought about the fact that in 6 years, she hadn't known his name until she needed a reason to fire him. She thought about Bart's voice on the phone, the best person we have in logistics, and how that information had been there all along, filed somewhere she hadn't thought to look. She wasn't going to transform overnight. She knew that about herself. The Renata who'd fired the janitor for mopping slowly was still somewhere in her, running on instinct, and instinct doesn't get dismantled in a day. But something had shifted, quietly, not dramatically, like a single weight being moved from one side of a scale to another. "Did you find him?" Sophie asked. "The flannel hero?" "I did," Renata said. "Is he okay?" "He's okay." "Good." There was the sound of shuffling, a TV in the background. "Mom, his daughter's favorite dinosaur is Brachiosaurus. Did you know that's the same as mine?" Renata smiled, alone in the car in the dark parking lot. "I didn't know that," she said, "but I think I'm starting to.